All right, today we're going to tackle something really powerful. What if the best way to fight anxiety isn't just picking one lane, but actually building a bridge? A bridge between two worlds that, usually feel like they're miles apart. Clinical science and spiritual faith. Let's dig in and see how these two can actually work together.
I mean, you know that feeling, right? That loop of worry that just keeps spinning and spinning in your head. It's something so many of us go through, and man, is it exhausting.
And here's the thing. The source material for this explainer makes it really clear that this feeling, it's not just in your head. It's a full-on crisis of the whole person. We're talking soul, spirit, and body. It starts in your mind, sure, but it absolutely spills over and impacts how you feel physically, how you feel spiritually. So a whole person problem, well, that's going to need a whole person solution. So to really build that bridge to a better place, we've got to start with the foundation. And that means starting with the science. Let's take a look at what is actually going on inside your body when that stress and anxiety starts to take over. Okay, so it really all comes down to this thing called the HPA Axis. Now, don't worry about the long name. Just think of it as your body's central alarm system. It's basically the command center for all things stress. And it's designed to protect you. It's a good thing. But, as we're about to see, sometimes it gets a little stuck. Now, this whole biological reaction sounds super complex, but you can actually break it down into a really simple chain of command. Think of it like this. Step 1, your brain's threat detector, the hypothalamus, senses danger. Step 2, it pings the pituitary gland, which is kind of like the master controller. And then step 3, the pituitary tells your adrenal glands, go time, and they flood your system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And boom, that's your classic fight or flight response kicking in. Okay, and here is the absolute key. For short-term danger, that system is a lifesaver. It's brilliant. But with chronic anxiety, it's like the smoke alarm is stuck in the on position. The danger is gone, but the alarm is still blaring. You're just constantly flooded with these stress hormones, and that doesn't just give you a racing heart, it literally makes it harder for the logical part of your brain to work properly. All right, so that's the physical side of things. That's the body's alarm system. But what's pulling the fire alarm in the first place? Well, that brings us to the other side of the bridge, the mind. Or, as our source material calls it, the soul's battlefield. This is where our thoughts pretty much create our feelings. So if you look at this from a clinical perspective, a huge driver of anxiety is something called cognitive distortions. The best way to think about these is like faulty wiring in your brain. They're these super common, totally automatic negative thought patterns that, aren't actually based in reality, but man, in that moment, they feel 100% true. And you've probably run into some of these before. Let's look at a few of the usual suspects. First, you've got catastrophizing. That's when you immediately jump to the absolute worst-case scenario. Then there's all or nothing thinking, where if it's not perfect, it's a total disaster. And of course, good old perfectionism, that impossible standard we put on ourselves. I'm going to go out on a limb and say at least one of those probably sounds a little familiar to you. Okay, so we've got the two sides of the canyon, right? We've looked at the biology of the body and these thought patterns in the mind. Now it's time to build that bridge. This is the really cool part where we see this incredible connection between two worlds that you almost never hear talked about in the same sentence. And this slide, right here, this is the heart of the whole idea. Look at this. On the left, you've got the clinical terms from therapies like CBT. And on the right, you've got these powerful spiritual parallels. So what psychology calls a cognitive distortion, faith calls the lie. And think about that for a second. A distortion sounds like a technical glitch, right? But a lie, that's a deception. That's something you can actively fight back against. The clinical idea of thought challenging lines up perfectly with taking thoughts captive. And restructuring a thought is exactly what renewing your mind is all about. This isn't just slapping new labels on old ideas. It's a profound shift in how you see the entire battle. And you know what's wild? This idea is ancient. This verse from 2 Corinthians is basically describing a modern clinical technique thousands of years ago. The core concept is exactly the same. You are not a passive victim of your thoughts. You don't have to just sit there and take it. You have the power, the agency, to grab those thoughts, to question them, and to line them up with something true. Okay, so the theory is fascinating, right? It's an incredible parallel, but here's the billion-dollar question. How do we actually do this? How do we put it into practice? Let's walk across that bridge right now and look at a simple 3-part technique you can start using today. And here it is. It's a simple 3-step process. First, you've got to identify the lie. You have to catch that distorted thought in the act, that catastrophizing, that perfectionism. Second, you challenge it. And in this integrated approach, you're not just challenging it with logic, you're challenging it with a capital T truth, like what you find in scripture. And finally, step 3, you replace it. You consciously and actively swap out that lie for a new, healthier thought, often through something like prayer or meditation.
Now, that mental practice is a total game changer, for sure. But remember what we said at the beginning? This is a whole person problem. So for real lasting peace, you need a strategy that covers all the bases. So let's zoom out and look at the complete holistic plan. Think of this as your integrated toolkit. For your mind and soul, you're using things like journaling to catch those lies and prayer to let go of the worry. For your body, you're doing practical things like deep breathing to calm down that HPA axis we talked about, and getting some moderate exercise to burn off that nervous energy. And then for your spirit, and this is huge, you're anchoring your identity in something that doesn't change, something solid, like God's steadfast love, instead of your own shaky performance. And that, right there, is the whole idea of mind over medicine, as our source presents it. It's not about pretending anxiety isn't real or just thinking happy thoughts. No way. It's about actively, intentionally using your mind, using the best of clinical science and the power of spiritual truth to choose what's real over what's a distortion. And when you do that, you find a peace that isn't dependent on your circumstances. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with something to think about for yourself. Next time you feel that loop of worries start to spin up, which one is it for you? Which cognitive distortion is your go-to? Is it catastrophizing, perfectionism, all or nothing thinking? Seriously, just being able to name it, that's the first and maybe the most important step across that bridge to peace. Thanks so much for joining me.